So today we're going to talk about how to use the TI-nspire CX2 calculator to get these answers. There's a few different ways, but I'm going to go through the way that will bring you the most consistency and validity for these answers. So go ahead and get the title, date, separate your page left side, right side. I'll show you this in the calculator, but what I want you to do is use the tiles, not the scratch pad. So please make sure that you make note of that. Now, example 1, we want to solve the following quadratics. We could totally try to solve these by hand. That's fine. But what I'm trying to do is to give you tools to help you be successful. So, first thing you need to do, whether you are using algebra or you're going to use technology, is get this equation equal to 0. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and I get x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. This one is factorizable. You can quickly factorize this and get your answers, so I'm going to show you that. So I get x minus 1, x minus 3, and so x equals 1 or x equals 3. Now, just because I can do that by hand, I'm going to show you how to do it on the calculator, and then my answers should match. Your calculator, what you will see is the home screen. You have 2 options, and this is what I said. Please don't use the scratch pad. What I want you to use is the tiles at the bottom. Now the tiles, the reason why I want you to use them is because they communicate with each other, and you can go in between them and take information from one tile and bring it to the other. The scratch pad you can only calculate and graph. So I want you to be in the habit of using these tiles at the bottom. When we are solving, there's some tricks, and you can YouTube this or Google it, however you want to research, and it'll work fine. That's great. But I'm going to show you the way that you should actually solve these. So what you're going to do is add a graph, and you're going to put in that quadratic equation after you set it equal to 0. So you're going to see the x, y, z down here at the bottom of the keypad. You're going to use that x squared minus 4x plus 3. And then you're going to go ahead and hit enter, and you get a lovely graph. Now, what you're looking for are these values here. Remember, the solution, when you're solving, it means the zeros, the x-intercepts, the roots. So that's the mentality that you want to take with when you're doing this. There's 2 ways that you can get the answer. The first way is you can hit menu, and you can add a table, and you can see the values. So what you're looking for is when y is 0. So automatically I can see that my solutions are 1 and 3. So that's one way. If you want to get rid of that table, you can go hit menu and then remove the table. The other way you can analyze this is go to menu and 6, which is analyze graph, and then we have all these options. Now remember, we're finding the solutions, but that's also finding the zeros. So when you find the zeros, if you look down here, it says lower bound. That means you want to be to the left of whatever you're looking at. So lower bound, and then I click, and it changes to upper bound, which means I want to be to the right. And you highlight and look, you get your solution here. Now this is kind of in the way, so I'm going to grab it and move it out of the way so I can read it a little bit. I'm going to move my equation, get that out of the way. So there's one of my solutions, and then you just go ahead and do it again. Menu 6, 1. You want to be to the left of that point, and then you get your other 0. Now notice that both zeros are still there. It doesn't matter how many times you do it, you'll get both of them. Now, again, solving a quadratic equation, we need to set it equal to 0. So I get 9x squared minus 9x minus 4 equals 0. I'm going to go ahead and see if this is factorizable. Just writing out my factor pairs. And it is. So I'm going to go ahead and substitute. And factorize. So this is what I get when I factorize. So when I solve this, hopefully those will also be my answers. Second example, I still have my first example up here, so I can do two things, and I'll show you both of them. I can go ahead and hit Control Document, which will get me a new page, and then I select a new graph, and I can graph it from there, which I'll do, and then the next one I'll show you a different way. So I have my 9x squared minus 9x minus 4. Enter. Now, I already know what my answers should be here, but let's just verify that. So here's my graph. I'm going to go ahead and table. I guess I'll start with the table and split screen. And what I'm looking for is when y is 0. Oh, look, I don't have a y is 0 thing here. But I do have a y goes from negative 4 to positive 14, so there's a 0 in between 1 and 2. And I do have another change in signs from 14 to negative 4, so there's going to be a 0 between negative 1 and 0. But I don't have the actual value, because this table is set to only put out integers. So what I need to do is not use the table, but actually go ahead and analyze the graph. So I'm going to go Menu, 6, Zeros, and I'm going to show you, again, lower bound. So there's one of my zeros. And then I can keep scrolling, and then I get the other 0. So if I don't want to do that twice, I can just go ahead and write down my answer of a negative 0.333, which we know is going to be a negative 1/3. And then I can scroll all the way over to the upper bound and get 1.33, which is the 4/3. Notice, though, if I use this method, I only have 1 0 showing up on the screen. So there's pluses and minuses to that. So the second process is now we're going to use our calculator to actually graph a quadratic function. Make sure that whenever you graph something, you put down the key features. And for a quadratic, the key features are the x-intercepts, the y-intercept, vertex, and axis of symmetry. So, the independent variable is the variable that changes regardless of outside influence. This means that this is the one that you usually have in the actual function. And this variable will always be plotted on the x-axis. Now your dependent variable is the variable that changes based on the independent variable. And this one we always put on the y-axis. Okay, so what we want to do is graph. So we got y equals a negative 2x squared plus 12x minus 15. You can do, instead of opening a new tab or a new page, you can close this. So you can go File, Close, and it'll close everything. I don't ever save. I don't need this stuff, and I don't want to slow my calculator down, so I always hit no. It takes me to my home screen. I can go ahead and open up a calculator, and then I'm back to square one. I have one tab open. I have my first function. I can go ahead and graph. So both ways work. Sometimes as you're going through this, you might have a lot of different graphs on there. It could be a lot. So you might want to close things down and just start out fresh. To each their own. Okay, so graphing this new function, I have a negative 2x squared plus 12x minus 15. Okay, there's my graph. I have my lovely equation. Now I need the key features. So what I'm looking for is my y-intercept. So let's look for that first on the table. So y-intercept is when x is 0. Y-intercept is 0, negative 15. That's quite low on this graph, so I'm actually not going to include it on there. It's not close to the vertex or the x-intercepts, so I'm just going to leave it out. But I am going to go ahead and analyze like I did before and find my zeros. And I'm going to do it separately so that each of them stays up, so that I have all this information on my screen, and then I can go ahead and copy this down on the paper. Okay, now that's overlapping, it's getting a little overloaded, so I'm going to grab that and move it to the side where I can read it. I can read it there. Okay, so I have my zeros, I need my vertex. So that's going to be my maximum on here since it is upside down. Same thing with finding the zeros, you want left bound, right bound, or lower bound, upper bound, and then you get your vertex here, and then obviously the axis of symmetry goes through the vertex with x equaling 3. So that's my information. I'm going to leave it up here so that I can look at it and copy it down on my paper, and that's how you do a graph in the IB. Now, just because it's in your calculator doesn't mean that's where the answer should stay. So what we need to do is get some information down. So the information that we need is our vertex. We found that on the graph. Our our x-intercepts or our solutions, and our axis of symmetry. Now I know we found the y-intercept. I didn't talk about it because it's a negative 12. It's way down there. So I'm going to leave that off for right now. What we're looking for are the key features that are close to the vertex. So we want the maximum or minimum, whatever the vertex is. And we want the shape of the graph. That's really important. And when we can, we want to put in the zeros or y-intercepts. So it's not only putting that graph down, it's also labeling the coordinates. And then there you go, that's your graph. So second example is y equals 2x squared minus 16x plus 30. One I want to show you, you can actually double click, so you can hover over the equation, double click it, and you get that equation editor bar in here again. You can delete all this stuff and write a new equation. I did not mean to do that. So instead of closing this or opening another tab, you can just delete what's there, and I'm going to put 2x squared minus 16x plus 30. Oh, apparently I have my caps on. Let's hopefully it won't do anything weird. Okay, so it changed the graph. The graph is all new, but if you notice, it now has some weird points on it. Now this one is important because it's 5, 0. That tells me that's one of my zeros or my x-intercepts. But this point is kind of random, and that's leftover stuff from the previous graph. So you can edit the equation and get a new graph. The things that you have on the previous graph will come over. So I would be careful in doing that sometimes, but sometimes it's worth it. So now that I have this equation, I have one of my zeros. I'm going to go get the other one by analyzing my graph and finding a 0. And then it pops up there, kind of overlapping. So again, I'm going to hover over it and move it. I need my vertex. So analyze graph minimum, lower bound, upper bound. There's my vertex. And the last thing I want to check is my y-intercept to see where we're at. If it's really, really high, then I'm not going to put it, 0, 30. I'm not putting that on my graph. That's, again, super high out of what I'm trying to do. So there's all that information. I'm going to go ahead and get that down on my paper. So this one, I'm going to graph like this. And from your graph, you should have your vertex, your x-intercepts or your zeros, and again, I'm not going to graph the, actually I'm going to redo that first one. I'm not going to graph the y-intercept because that's quite high up there. So there are my key features, and then I label them. Okay, so make sure that you get down any steps that I'm saying in how to figure out these important pieces of information. If you don't get those down, and then you go to do this on your own, you're going to forget which order the keys are. You're going to spend too much time trying to find this information instead of just getting the answers to the questions. I hope you realize that sometimes the calculator can be faster, and sometimes using your brain is actually faster. So It's a tool that we have to help us work through some questions, but it's not necessarily a tool that we need to use every time. Please let me know if you have any questions. Work on some practice questions using your calculator, but please make sure that you do some by hand as well. And then let me know if you have any questions that I can help you with, and then come back and write a reflection.